South Dakota isn't a state commonly associated with logging, but forest product companies are vital to the Black Hills. In fact, the timber industry, as the United States knows it today, has its origins right here.
For folks who care about forest management and care about our national forests, we're standing in a very important place. We're standing at the site of case number 1, the very first ever federal timber sale in the nation, and it's right here on our Black Hills National Forest. This timber sale didn't happen here by chance. It was a product of a lot of the activity happening, the mining activity happening in the Black Hills at the time, and a lot of different political movements at the time also. And since that time, since the very first federal timber sale, the Black Hills National Forest has been a model of what forest management and sustainability can be.
Black Hills, of course, we have a thriving forest products industry. We have primary processors that go out and actually cut trees down out in the woods. They, in turn, make boards out of them.
Long gone are the days of cutting trees with handsaws. Timber companies use a variety of machinery that allow them to harvest trees more efficiently. Timcos cut and stack trees to be picked up by skidders who transport them to a processor, which removes the limbs and cuts the logs to set lengths.
You're running a machine that has a full computer center inside of it. So the training that's needed there, not much different than here at the sawmill. It takes a whole level to understand how to operate the computer that's running that machine. And it'll be continuous change. You either have to stay up with the new technology or you're far behind, and if you fall behind, then you're not going to be here very long.
Right. When timber companies go into a forest and harvest trees, they are engaging in what is called a timber sale. This is when both government agencies and private landowners contract timber companies to harvest trees from predetermined sections of land.
Whether you're going to go to some private lands and cut some trees for a rancher that he wants removed through a timber sale contract with him, or the National Forest, which has a very complicated forest plan to determine how much they want to remove to keep that forest sustainable. Then they designate certain areas that need treated, and then that goes to a bidding process that then we bid on to see if we can acquire that timber sale. Then when you get down to it, there's a couple ways that forest might be treated by. They select in which trees we leave, or they select which trees we take.
The stand that we're standing in now is one that they decided needed to be thinned. And this is a commercial thinning operation where the trees are mature enough that we can remove some of those mature trees that are greater than 9 inches and pay for them. And they send their foresters in to mark the trees in order to meet the Forest Service objective for this stand. And in this stand, it is a thinning. It's to leave mature trees behind so they have adequate space to grow and capture the sunlight and water and nutrients, reducing that fire risk, and give room for them to continue growing. The way that they decide what trees are going to go and what trees are going to stay are based on multiple facets that they have that help meet their objective. It's tree form, tree size, spacing of those trees, and then they send a crew out to put paint on the trees to meet those guidelines that their foresters develop. And so here you can see these trees are painted with a pink paint, about eye level here, and that pink paint signifies trees that cannot be cut in this unit, in this stand. So any tree that has pink paint at eye level, and actually on the back side of these trees, there's a ground mark on it. So after a tree is cut, we couldn't cut this tree without them knowing, because there's a stump mark on the bottom. So after the harvest is done, they can come back and look at our stumps, and if they see that there's pink stumps on the ground, they will know that a tree that was not supposed to be taken was taken.
After trees have been harvested, they are transported to sawmills to be cut into boards, posts, and other wood products. Headquartered in Hewlett, Wyoming, just down the road from Devil's Tower, Nyman Enterprises has sawmills in the Black Hills which specialize in creating different wood products.
I'm fortunate enough to be the third generation in our family business. My dad's name is James, mine Jim. My granddad actually started the operation in 1936 after the Great Depression, when the family left the original farm and came out, and he started the first sawmill actually over by Hills Canyon between Custer and Upton, Wyoming, and then moved it over here later on, and my dad got involved. I think he started working when he was 6 years old to help drag sawdust out from under the floor in the sawmill, and Dad made sure I started when I was 6 years old piling 4-foot boards. So I was fortunate enough after a number of years to go off to college to the University of Wyoming, and then come back and get involved in the operation here.
So it sounds to me as if there's kind of 3 large steps in the process if you're looking from a very general standpoint. So talk to me about what happens in those 3 different steps in very general terms.
The logs come into the sawmill and they're first debarked. Then we have 2 primary breakdown machines that cut the logs into smaller chunks. And then there's other processes that finish making the lumber into a rough width and thickness in the sawmill. It is then sorted, stacked, and after it's stacked, then it's taken over to our dry kiln, which is loaded into the kilns. The lumber is dried from that department, then it goes over to our planing department, which we surface it to the finished thickness and width. It is graded and then packaged and sent out either in that form. Some of it is removed from that process and taken over to our molder line, which they take it and make it into a pattern stock for other use for walls and ceilings and such.
What was the idea or the thought process that spurred your family getting into the timber industry?
My granddad had a truck, and there was a need for grain doors. So his first sawmill built grain doors for the old the box cars on the rail to ship grain and different things. It's all made out of wood to put the grain into. So that's his first products were grain doors that he was making. And that was up on our main ranch, and then he decided to move it into town. So it started around grain doors and went from there to boards to timbers. Later on, we was one of the big producers of mine timbers for the Home State Gold Mine. So as a kid, we shipped a lot of timbers up to lead to the gold mine.
On the way to Mount Rushmore, Baker Timber Products is also a multi-generational business, having served the Black Hills for 60 years and counting.
1961 was a very dry year, and both my dad and my uncle were ranchers, and they thought they could make a little extra money to buy hay for the cattle. So they started cutting, back in them days, pulpwood. Dad eventually went all to the timber business, and in the 70s bought a post and pole peeler and started peeling posts, and in about 1980 we started sawing mostly squares for the pole barn market.
So the process, basically, the logs come in and we load it onto our carriage and run it past our big circle saw. We saw some sideboards, 1x4s, 1x6s, and so forth off the edges, but we ultimately try to end up with a square, sort of like this, in various lengths and sizes, and that gets shipped to treating plants for various ag products and so forth.
Through the process of cutting boards, there are parts of the tree that is left over. Instead of sending those remnants to the landfill, timber companies utilize them to create several byproducts.
When a product comes into the mill, for example, if it gets debarked, we've sold the bark for landscaping purposes. And then any edgings or slabs that come off of the tree get chipped, and so that gets sent down to a Dakota panel or to the vet home for heat. And then, of course, everything else, all the product that we actually saw or the post that we actually make is a product that gets utilized. So everything that comes in goes out as a product, and so there's very little, if any, waste.
The byproducts of sawing those logs into boards gets made into either animal bedding, shavings, pellets. The chips go to playground facilities. The bark goes to landscape companies. So all that gets used, what gets taken out of here.
What are some things that you wish that people better understood or knew about the timber industry and all that goes into it?
A lot of people think we're just out there cutting down trees just to make lumber, which is true to a point, but it's also, we make a healthy forest by going out there. It's like anything, overpopulation generates things that die, disease sets in, bugs alike. In a drought year, they got to have so much water to continue to stay alive, and then they're fighting for that water out there. So again, it's you need to manage the forest to keep it healthy.
It takes about 100 years for a tree to grow from a seedling to saw timber size in the Black Hills. So we're talking generations of people. But a well-managed forest, nevertheless, can still be harvested about every 20 years just by doing thinnings without taking too many trees off. And that's kind of what we strive for here in the Black Hills. That makes it sustainable. Because we not only need to sustain our forest, but we want to sustain our forest products industry.
There's been more than 6 billion board feet of timber harvested from the Black Hills National Forest, all while the timber stocking in the forest, the standing timber, continued to rise over the years since case number 1. And as you can see around us, this area has been harvested 5 times, depending on where you're at, sometimes more. There's equipment operating in the background of us today, another timber sale operation, and we have a lot of very beautiful forest. And in the Black Hills, it's a well-guided science of thinning the trees.
They realize that if they take too many trees, then eventually there aren't going to be any trees left.
Right.
So we try to watch that very closely.
I think it's important to note, especially from an outsider looking in, is that regardless of how many machines are put into to pulling all of this together, there are humans along the way that are spending their time being focused and working very hard to be able to help all of us, in a sense of taking a resource that we can't just use. I can't just go out and say, okay, I now want a board from this tree, or I now want I want pellets from this so that I can use those in my stove and heat my house in this very cold day. So I think it's just really neat that there's so many people that are out there committed to this industry who are helping us have products that are they're part of our existence to an extent of we need structures to be able to live and work and learn in, but then also just being able to help the health of the forest, as you mentioned earlier. That's something that's very important, and it's all a part of the ecosystem, right? I mean, we're all a part of something, and so I think it's really neat the role that all of you play in this.
A lot of folks don't realize how closely tied the forest products industry is to our local communities as well. It's not just folks out working in the woods. There are people who work in the sawmills. Again, there's resource professionals, there's marketing teams and people in offices, and all total, the forest products industry here, the companies, they directly employ 1,400 individuals. And those are people from our local communities.
Wow.
Those jobs contribute more than $120 million in salaries and contractor payments back into our local communities. In the Black Hills, forest management and timber harvest operations created 3 times more jobs than the runner-up, which was recreation and tourism combined.
Really?
And those jobs paid 5 times the salary that the second place runner-up, again, recreation and tourism combined, paid. We're sitting in case number 1, and we've talked about the tradition of forest management in the Black Hills, starting right where we're sitting. But there's a lot of tradition in the people as well. And as you go around to the sawmills, to the harvest professionals working in the woods, you'll quickly learn that a lot of them are multi-generational, 2nd, 3rd, sometimes even 4th generation, working in forest management, working in forest products here in the Black Hills. And that's a really long, strong tradition that we're very proud of here in the Black Hills. The companies are all locally owned. These are not stock optioned companies. These are companies that are born out of the Black Hills by people who live in the Black Hills.
Like a farmer and rancher, the timber industry are really wholesome, really hardworking, have a good work ethic, and loyal employees. So you have I have a loyalty to them because they become part of a culture of a community, especially in a small town. So you want to help preserve and protect that culture that comes along, to give them an opportunity to pass that work ethic on to the next generation that you might not find in a big city.
Jack, what are your thoughts on coming back and kind of continuing on this legacy or heritage that your father and uncle have done and previous to that?
like Bill said and Dad said, the family's been involved with this industry for a long time, and so one of my goals is to maintain a positive reputation and keep moving forward and building a positive, strong, resilient forest.
The most important part is sustainability in the forest, and in lies the question of the Black Hills and what is sustainable here. How many trees can this land hold? They've seen the picture of this forest in the 90s, and it's beautiful and full of trees, but then all of a sudden you have some massive, the largest wildfires we've had, the largest beetle epidemic we've had, because we allowed this forest to get overstocked. So now that argument comes down to what is sustainable.
Timber companies are necessary for multiple reasons. Without these businesses, not only do local economies suffer, but the health of forests is put in danger.
There are places in the country that have lost their forest products industries. Particularly Colorado has lost most of their industry, New Mexico, Arizona, and once that industry is gone, it's very, very hard to bring it back, especially when they're primarily dependent upon federal lands.
There are hardships. Obviously, the forest products companies do a lot of good in the Black Hills. We really consider ourselves as partners with all the landowners, private landowners, the state, Forest Service. We're all in this together to manage and care for the Black Hills. At the end of the day, forest products companies are companies, and they have to have material to run. They have to make a dollar or they cease to operate. And without getting enough material for companies to operate, they will shut down. And it's important that it is entered into as a partnership, and everybody comes into this looking at ways that we can help each other. And it's not just the forest industry, it's everybody playing a role in making sure that we can care for our forest and care for our communities.
Our local forest product businesses and their hardworking employees' impact can't be understated. The next time you drive by a logging truck, remember that is just one cog in a machine that creates jobs and helps the Black Hills remain a resilient, healthy forest.